Millionaire husband said never touch me public, but when he saw her with another man he lost control. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new dramatic stories. It is quick, it is free, and it is the best way to support us in bringing you more cinematic love tales that touch the heart. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to today's story and to our main characters. The soft hum of an air purifier was the only sound inside the vast glass office on the top floor of Hale Corporation. The city stretched endlessly beyond the window, a sea of lights under the fading sunset. At the massive oak desk, Mike Hale, 32 billionaire CEO, sat in silence, his expression carved in marble. Across from him, Wendy Brooks gripped the pen tighter, her pulse echoing in her ears. Between them lay a leather folder, the contract that would bind them together. Not in love, but in obligation. Mike's tone was even, almost cold. Sign it. This marriage is only for appearances. You will attend the events I choose, speak when spoken to, and most importantly, he looked directly into her eyes, his voice dropping to a low command. Never touch me in public. Wendy blinked, trying to steady her breathing. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. She nodded, forcing a thin smile. Understood. Her signature slid across the last page with a trembling line. Mike reached forward, took the contract, and without another glance, slipped it into his drawer. Then he placed a small velvet box in front of her. Inside, a platinum wedding band gleamed cold under the light. For the cameras, he said flatly. It is part of the deal. Wendy lifted the ring, her reflection warping on the polished metal. It was beautiful and completely empty of meaning. She had agreed to this arrangement only because she had no other choice. Her father's heart surgery had drained every cent of their savings. The design firm she once worked for had fired her after a false accusation of leaking confidential plans, a scandal orchestrated by a jealous coworker. She had been desperate when Mike's assistant reached out with an offer, a temporary marriage to protect his reputation during a corporate merger. 3 months, $200,000, freedom afterward. It sounded simple, until she saw the man himself. Up close, Mike was intimidatingly perfect. Every line of his tailored suit screamed control, from the crisp collar to the way he never loosened his tie, not even after hours. His dark hair was neatly combed back, and his blue-gray eyes gave nothing away. Wendy could not decide if he was handsome or terrifying, maybe both. She slipped the ring onto her finger. It was slightly loose, he noticed. I can have it resized, he said. No need, she murmured, pulling her hand back quickly. His phone buzzed. Without another word, he stood, signaling the conversation was over. Claire will show you to your room. We fly to Aspen tomorrow for the engagement announcement. Be ready at 8. And just like that, he walked out, leaving Wendy alone in a room that smelled of money and detachment. That night, she sat on the edge of the guest bed in his penthouse. The city below glittered like another universe she could not touch. On the nightstand, her phone screen glowed with a message from the hospital. Surgery scheduled Friday. Payment confirmed. She exhaled, relief mixing with guilt. You are doing the right thing, Wendy, she whispered to herself. Just 3 months. Her gaze drifted to the wedding ring resting on her finger. It felt heavier than gold should. The next morning, the private jet was waiting. Mike was already seated, reading documents. He did not look up when she boarded. Wendy took a seat across from him, hands folded neatly on her lap. The silence stretched until she cleared her throat. I know you do not want conversation, but I wanted to say thank you. What you are doing will save my father's life. He did not respond immediately. His eyes flicked toward her, unreadable. I am not doing this for charity, Miss Brooks. You have something I need, a spotless reputation. Do your part, and you will be compensated. That is all. She turned toward the window, swallowing her pride. Snow-capped mountains shimmered in the distance as the plane cut through the clouds. 2 days later, the engagement gala took place in the grand ballroom of the Hale estate, chandeliers blazing, champagne glasses clinking, reporters whispering. Cameras followed their every step as they entered, her hand resting on his arm. The flash of bulbs painted their faces in light and shadow. To the crowd, they looked perfect, the powerful billionaire and his elegant fiancée. But she could feel it. The stiff line of his body, the subtle inch of space he kept between them, the warning in his voice earlier that evening. Remember, Miss Brooks, we play the part, but no touching. She nodded then, but now under the glow of the chandeliers, something inside her twisted. Every time she smiled for the cameras, she felt a little smaller. A journalist leaned forward with a microphone. "Mr. Hale, your fiancé looks radiant tonight. Can we expect a public kiss for the cover?" Mike's jaw flexed. His answer was calm but sharp. "Our relationship does not need displays of affection to be real." The crowd laughed politely. The reporter stepped back. Wendy's face burned, but she held her poise. Her heart thudded against the ribs of her borrowed gown. Later, when the photographers turned away, she exhaled softly and said, "You could have just smiled." He met her gaze, voice low, "And you could have remembered the rules." She looked away, eyes shimmering under the golden light. The orchestra started playing again, and the ballroom filled with polite laughter and waltzing couples. They stood side by side, two strangers wearing rings that meant nothing yet somehow, in the reflection of the crystal chandeliers. Both looked lonelier than ever. That night, as the city slept, Wendy sat by the window of the guest suite, her makeup still flawless, her heart far from it. Outside, snow began to fall softly over the mansion grounds. She traced a small fog circle on the glass with her finger, whispering to the empty room, 3 months. Just 3 months. Local. But somewhere down the hall, in his own room, Mike stood by the same window, watching the snow too, unaware that the walls he had built around himself had just begun to crack. The snow over Aspen shimmered like scattered diamonds under the pale morning Sunday. The engagement photos had already flooded every magazine and business blog in the country. To the world, Mike Hale and Wendy Brooks looked like a perfect power couple. But behind the closed doors of his mountain estate, silence filled every hallway. Wendy woke up early that morning to the sound of faint footsteps echoing through the marble floors. Mike was already dressed, standing by the fireplace, reading the news on his tablet. The light from the flames caught the silver watch on his wrist. He looked flawless, untouchable, and miles away from her world. "Good morning," she said quietly. He nodded without looking up. "Breakfast is ready downstairs. The chef has prepared something light. We have an interview at 9. It was not the reply she hoped for. She forced a polite smile and followed him to the dining room. The table was long enough for 12, but only 2 plates were set. Mike sat at the far end, scrolling through his schedule while she picked at her food. Every sound the clink of a fork, the ticking clock seemed too loud. After a few moments, she tried to start a conversation. "Do you always live like this?" He glanced up briefly. "Like what?" "So controlled. Everything on a schedule. It is called discipline," he said, his tone clipped. "People who build empires do not run on chaos." Wendy looked down at her plate. People who build empires still need to breathe. For the first time, he hesitated, then he looked away. "Eat your breakfast, Miss Brooks." The name hit her harder than she expected. Miss Brooks, as if she was just another employee. Later that day, during the televised interview, Wendy sat beside him on the cream sofa under bright studio lights. The reporter smiled wide. "You two make quite the elegant pair. Tell us, how did you meet?" Mike began, his voice smooth and rehearsed. "It was a business event in Los Angeles. I was looking for someone with class and discretion." Wendy exceeded both. The words business event and discretion sliced through her. She kept smiling for the cameras, but her heart sank. When the lights finally dimmed and the reporter thanked them, she stood first. "You could have said something real," she murmured. Mike turned toward her, expression unreadable. "The truth is not always the story people want to hear." She stared at him for a moment, then walked out of the studio, her heels clicking hard on the marble floor. That evening, she found herself in the small glass greenhouse behind the estate. It was the only warm place she could breathe. Tiny succulents lined the tables, and the scent of damp soil filled the air. She sat on a wooden bench, hugging her knees. She whispered, 3 months, Wendy. Just finish what you started." The door creaked behind her. Mike stepped in, holding a folder. "You left your notes from the interview." "Thank you," she said, not meeting his eyes. He stood still for a moment. The quiet stretched between them, filled with things unsaid. Then he spoke, softer this time. "You handled the questions well. I underestimated you." Wendy looked up, surprised. That almost sounded like a compliment. He allowed a faint smirk. "Do not get used to it." Something in his tone made her laugh. Just a small, real laugh. For a heartbeat, the distance between them felt smaller. Then his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, and the wall returned. "I have a meeting. Get some rest." He turned and left, closing the door with the same careful control that defined every move he made. Days turned into weeks. They attended events together, dinners, charity galas. She learned to smile when the cameras were on and disappear when they were off. But slowly, Mike began to notice the small things, how she adjusted his tie before a photo, how she covered for him when he forgot to greet a donor, how she stayed calm when reporters pushed too far. One night, after a foundation event in New York, they shared an elevator ride back to the penthouse. It was past midnight. She kicked off her heels, sighing, "I cannot believe people actually enjoy these things." He loosened his tie slightly. "It is a game. Everyone wants something." "And what do you want, Mike?" He looked at her, really looked this time. The question caught him off guard. "What I want has nothing to do with what I am allowed to have." She blinked, unsure how to respond. The elevator doors opened, and he stepped out first. For the first time, she wondered if the man who claimed not to feel anything might be the one most trapped by his own walls. A few days later, Wendy found herself back in her element designing. Mike had given her free rein to redesign the guest lounge for an upcoming corporate retreat. It was a small gesture, but it felt like trust. She spent the entire afternoon sketching layouts, her hair tied messily, a pencil tucked behind her ear. When Mike walked in unannounced, he stopped at the doorway. For a moment, he just watched her, sunlight spilling across her face as she bent over the plans. "You look different when you are focused," he said. She turned, startled. "Different how?" "Live." The word hung in the air. She froze, unsure if she heard him right. Before she could speak, he cleared his throat. "Dinner at 7. Do not be late." And he walked away again, pretending the word had never slipped. That night she dressed simply, in a navy dress and a silver pendant her father had given her. The dinner table was set for 2 again, but this time Mike sat closer, not at the opposite end. The conversation was quieter, more natural. He asked about her designs, her dreams. She listened to him talk about his mother, who had passed away when he was 19. His voice softened when he mentioned her. "She used to tell me that money can build walls or it can build bridges. I guess I chose the wrong one," he said quietly. Wendy smiled gently. "It is not too late to rebuild." Their eyes met across the table. No photographers, no contracts, no rules, just two people who had finally stopped pretending for a moment. The air between them changed, fragile but real. Outside, the snow began to fall again, blanketing the night in silence. Neither of them spoke another word. But for the first time since signing that contract, Wendy no longer felt like a guest in his world. And Mike, the man who once ordered her never to touch him in public, found himself wondering what it might feel like if she did. Morning light spilled across the penthouse windows, touching everything in gold. A week had passed since that quiet dinner, and something between Mike and Wendy had shifted, subtle, almost invisible but real. She found herself noticing the way he lingered before leaving for work, the way his voice softened when he said her name. He had stopped calling her Miss Brooks. Now it was just Wendy, and sometimes when their eyes met, she saw the hesitation of a man who wanted to say more but did not know how. Still, the rules remained written in invisible ink around them. The contract was the unspoken wall that both refused to touch. That morning, Wendy was reviewing color samples for the guest lounge project when Mike's assistant knocked. "Mr. Hale asked me to bring you this." Inside the envelope was a card, an invitation to the Hale Foundation charity ball, a major event for investors and media. Her heart skipped. The date circled in red ink was only 2 days away. She found Mike in his study later that afternoon. "You want me to attend this?" she asked, holding up the invitation. He looked up from his laptop, calm as always. "Of course. You are my wife, remember?" She crossed her arms. "A contract wife." He closed the laptop and leaned back. "Appearances matter, Wendy. You know that." "I know," she said softly. "I just wonder if they are all that matters to you." He did not answer. But something flickered behind his eyes, something like guilt or maybe fear. The night of the ball arrived with the sound of cameras flashing outside the Grand Marquette Hotel. Limousines lined the street, guests in glittering gowns stepping onto the red carpet. Inside, chandelier glowed like liquid fire. Wendy stood before the mirror in her suite, adjusting the strap of her silver dress. It was elegant, understated her own design. The same pendant from her father rested against her collarbone, the only piece of her real life she still carried. A knock sounded. Mike entered, dressed in a black tuxedo that looked like it had been made for him, which, Of course, it had. For a moment, he just looked at her. "You look perfect," he said quietly. "Thank you," she replied, trying to ignore the warmth rising in her chest. He offered his arm. "Shall we?" As they descended the grand staircase into the ballroom, heads turned. A sea of glittering gowns and black suits parted slightly as photographers captured every angle. For the first hour, everything went according to plan. They greeted donors, exchanged practice smiles, posed for the press. But when Wendy slipped away to the refreshment table, she felt a tap on her shoulder. "Wendy Brooks?" She turned. A familiar face smiled back. Daniel Reyes, her former colleague from the design firm. "Daniel?" she said, surprised. "It has been so long." He laughed softly. "I almost did not recognize you. You are Mrs. Hale now. That is a long way from sketching floor plans on coffee-stained napkins." They talked for a while about work, about the old days, both unaware of the pair of eyes watching them from across the room. Mike stood near the bar, drink in hand, pretending to listen to a board member, but his attention never left Wendy. She was laughing, really laughing for the first time in months, and it was not because of him. When Daniel touched her arm gently while showing her a photo on his phone, something inside Mike snapped tight, like a wire pulled to breaking. The board member was still talking when Mike abruptly set down his glass and walked away. Wendy turned just in time to see him approaching. His expression was composed, but his eyes burned with something she had never seen before. "Mike," she began, but he reached her before she could say more. He placed a hand on the small of her back and leaned close enough for only her to hear. "I think you have had enough socializing for tonight." She blinked, startled. "He is just an old friend." His jaw flexed. "I am sure he is." Lo! Before she could react, he guided her toward the dance floor as the orchestra began to play. The crowd watched, murmuring. The mighty Mike Hale rarely danced. Yet here he was, hand on his wife's waist, pulling her closer than any photographer had ever captured. Wendy looked up at him, breath caught. "You are breaking your own rule," she whispered. He did not look away, then let it break. The music swelled around them, violins and cellos filling the air. His hand tightened slightly at her back. Her fingers trembled where they rested on his shoulder. For a few minutes, the world outside that moment disappeared. When the song ended, he released her abruptly and stepped back, as if shocked by what he had just done. The crowd applauded, flashes went off, and whispers rippled through the room. "Mr. and Mrs. Hale look truly in love," someone said. Wendy's heart pounded. Mike looked at her once, then turned away, heading toward the balcony. She followed him outside. Cold night air rushed over the city lights below. He stood at the railing, both hands gripping it hard. "What was that?" she asked, her voice shaking. He did not answer at first. Then quietly, "I do not know." "You told me never to touch you in public." "I know." "Then why?" "Because," he interrupted, finally turning toward her, "I could not stand seeing you smile at another man." The confession hung between them, raw and unplanned. His control, the thing he valued most, had cracked wide open. Wendy stared at him, stunned. "You are jealous?" he exhaled sharply. "Maybe I am. Maybe I am everything I swore I would never be." The orchestra inside struck another tune, muffled through the glass doors. The sound made the moment feel even more private, more fragile. Wendy took a step closer. "You do not have to pretend anymore, Mike." "Dull." He looked at her then not as the contract wife who saved his image, but as the woman who had slipped into his guarded world and made it human again. "I wish it were that simple," he said. His voice was hoarse now, the mask gone. She reached up and touched the side of his face. "Sometimes it is." He froze, torn between instinct and desire. For a heartbeat, he almost leaned in. But then his phone buzzed again, shattering the spell. He stepped back. "We should go inside." "Arding." Wendy lowered her hand, blinking away the sting in her eyes. "Right, back to pretending." He looked at her once more, regret flickering behind his calm expression. Then he turned and walked inside, leaving her alone on the balcony with nothing but the wind and the echo of what almost happened. Inside the ballroom, the photographers still waited, hungry for the next perfect shot. But for the first time, Wendy no longer cared about the cameras or the contract. Somewhere deep down, she realized the truth that frightened them both. He had told her never to touch him in public. Yet when he finally did, it was the most honest moment of their entire marriage. Snow was falling again over the city, soft and relentless, as if the world itself wanted to bury the memory of that night at the gala. But no snowfall could quiet the tension that now lived between Mike and Wendy. 2 days had passed since the dance. They had barely spoken. The tabloids were on fire, photos of them, locked in that intimate waltz, splashed across every front page. The ICE CEO melts for his wife. The kiss that broke the contract. Reporters camped outside the estate gates, demanding a statement. Mike stayed inside his office most of the time, doors shut, voice sharp whenever anyone knocked. Wendy, meanwhile, tried to disappear into work, sketching designs for the foundation's new headquarters. But every time she drew a straight line, her mind replayed the look in his eyes that night, the way his control had slipped, the way his hand had lingered a heartbeat too long. That evening, the air in the penthouse felt colder than usual. Wendy was in the kitchen, pouring tea, when the sound of footsteps made her freeze. Mike stood in the doorway, sleeves rolled up, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," he said. She set the cup down carefully. "About the gala?" "About everything." He stepped closer, but his tone stayed measured, like a man trying not to lose his composure twice. "The photos, the press. I should have handled it better." "Don't let go. You mean you should not have touched me?" He sighed. "I broke the rule. It was not professional." "Professional?" she echoed softly. "Is that what we are calling it now?" He looked away, jaw tight. "You do not understand, Wendy. People like me do not get to make emotional choices. One wrong move and everything I have built falls apart." She met his eyes, her voice quiet but firm. "Then maybe what you built was never real to begin with." The silence that followed was heavy, raw. Mike turned his gaze toward the window, where snow drifted like ash against the glass. "You are free to end this arrangement if you want," he said finally. "The contract was for appearances, not punishment." She stared at him, pain flickering across her face. "You really think this is just an arrangement? What else could it be?" Her lips parted as if to answer, but she stopped herself. She reached for her coat instead. "Maybe you should figure that out before it is too late." "Ho?" And with that, she walked out, the sound of the door clicking behind her, echoing through the empty hall. The next morning, Mike found himself pacing in his office, unable to focus. The snowstorm outside had turned into a whiteout, and the city lights blurred into nothing. He looked at his phone, scrolling through endless messages, board meetings, investor calls, headlines. None of it mattered. He typed her name once, erased it, then typed again. Finally, he hit call. No answer. He tried again. Still nothing. He swore under his breath and grabbed his coat. Across town, Wendy sat in a quiet cafe, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee gone cold. She had come there to think, to breathe, but the noise of the city outside only reminded her how far she still was from belonging. Her phone buzzed with messages from reporters, friends, even strangers asking for comments about her fairy tale marriage. She turned it face down, exhausted. The door opened. Cold wind swept in, and with it Mike. He spotted her instantly, his presence drawing every eye in the room. Without hesitation, he crossed the cafe and stopped at her table. "Wendy," he said, his breath visible in the chill. "We need to talk." She looked up, startled. "Here?" "Here," he said simply. He sat opposite her. For once, there was no mask, no distance. Just two people caught in the aftermath of pretending too long. "I do not want to keep doing this," he said quietly. "Not the silence, not the lies. Come lay." She waited, heart pounding. "I thought control made me strong," he continued. "But that night at the gala, when I saw you with someone else, I realized how fragile that control really was. I was jealous, Wendy. I was terrified. Because for the first time, it was not about image, it was about you." Her eyes filled, but she said nothing. He leaned forward slightly, voice breaking. "You asked me once what I built my empire on. It was power, rules, fear. But when you walked away, I realized none of it means anything if I lose the only person who made me feel human again." The cafe had gone silent. Even the barista behind the counter had stopped moving. Wendy finally spoke, her voice soft. "And what do you want now, Mike?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the contract. He tore it clean in half. "No more rules," he said. "No more pretending." She looked at the torn paper, then back at him. "You cannot just erase what happened with one gesture." "I know," he said, meeting her gaze. "But maybe I can start with one truth. I love you, Wendy." For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, she reached across the table and took his hand. The warmth of it felt both foreign and familiar. Outside, the snow finally stopped falling. The world was still. Wendy smiled faintly. "If we do this for real, no more contracts. No more walls. He nodded. Only us. Calm. And for the first time since that cold morning in his office, when he had said, "Never touch me in public," Mike Hale lifted her hand and pressed a quiet kiss to her fingers right there, in front of everyone. No flashbulbs, no stage, no pretense, just truth. The snow had melted by the time spring arrived, leaving the Hale estate surrounded by soft green hills and the faint scent of blooming roses. The world outside had moved on from the headlines. Reporters had found new scandals, new faces to chase. But for Mike and Wendy, the quiet after the storm felt like something sacred, a chance to breathe, to learn how to be real again. It had been 3 weeks since that night in the cafe. They had gone home together in silence, and for the first time, there were no walls between them. Mike no longer slept in his separate room. He still worked late, still answered calls at odd hours, but the cold edge in his voice was gone. Wendy noticed the small changes, first the way he made her coffee before leaving for the office, the way he listened when she spoke. They were learning to exist not as business partners, not as a contract, but as something fragile and human. One morning, Wendy woke to the sound of the doorbell echoing through the penthouse. She threw on her robe and opened the door to find a delivery man holding a large flat box. "From Hale Foundation," he said, handing her the clipboard. She signed and brought it to the living room. Inside was a framed blueprint, the design she had created weeks ago for the foundation's new headquarters. But across the bottom corner, engraved in silver letters, were the words, "Architect, Wendy Hale." "Oh!" Her eyes widened. She turned as Mike entered, his tie loosened, coffee in hand. "You did this?" she asked, voice trembling. He smiled faintly. "You deserve credit for what you built. Not just as an employee, as my partner." Her throat tightened. "I do not even have a degree, Mike. People will question it." "Let them," he said. "I am done living for their approval." The quiet sincerity in his tone broke through whatever hesitation she had left. She set the frame down and crossed the room to him. "For someone who once banned affection," she whispered, "you have changed." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You changed me." Later that week, the Hale Foundation hosted the unveiling of the new project in the very ballroom where their story had begun. It felt symbolic, the same chandeliers, the same press cameras, but everything was different now. Wendy stood by the window, wearing a pale gold dress. She felt calm, grounded, no longer pretending. Mike approached, taking her hand without hesitation. Cameras flashed, but he did not care. When it was his turn to speak, he walked up to the microphone. The room fell silent. "Last year," he began, "I built walls around my life, strong, perfect walls. I told myself they were protection. But I learned that walls do not protect, they isolate. It took one person's honesty to show me what love without conditions actually means." He turned toward her, his voice softer now. "That person is my wife, Wendy Hale." Gasps rippled through the crowd as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Wendy froze, her heart pounding. "This time," he said, "there is no contract, no rules, only choice." He knelt before her under the golden light of the chandeliers, the entire room holding its breath. "Wendy, will you marry me again, this time for real?" Her eyes filled instantly. She nodded, unable to speak. When he slipped the ring onto her finger, the applause felt like thunder. But in that moment, it was just the two of them, no cameras, no masks, only truth, finally spoken aloud. After the ceremony, they slipped away from the noise and stepped onto the terrace overlooking the city. The evening air was cool, scented with lilacs. Below, the skyline glimmered like 1,000 tiny promises. Wendy leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "The way it all started?" He smiled, his arm tightening around her. "Every mistake led me to this, so no, I do not regret a thing." She laughed softly. "That is very poetic for a man who once said, 'Never touch me in public.'" He chuckled. "I was an idiot." "Completely." She agreed, grinning. He turned to her, serious again. "I meant it when I said you changed everything. You showed me that love is not weakness, it is courage." She looked up at him, eyes glistening under the city lights. "And you showed me that sometimes the people we fear most are the ones we end up needing the most." Tars. They stood in silence, the sounds of the celebration fading behind them. Then Mike whispered, almost to himself, "You once said 3 months, remember?" "I remember." He took her hand, kissed her ring finger softly. "Let us make it forever this time." The wind carried laughter from the ballroom, blending with the faint music drifting through the open doors. Wendy smiled, feeling the warmth of his hand in hers. From a fake marriage built on lies and distance had come something no contract could create: trust, forgiveness, and love. And as the city below shimmered with life, Mike finally broke his own final rule. He kissed her under the stars, not as a performance, not for the cameras, but because it was real. This time, when he touched her in public, it was forever. A few months had passed since the night of their second wedding. Summer had settled over the city, warm and golden, and for the first time in years, the Hale mansion no longer felt like a museum. The air inside was alive, laughter echoing from the kitchen, sunlight spilling across the marble floors, the faint sound of Wendy humming while she worked on her designs. Mike had changed in quiet ways. He still wore his suits and ran his meetings with precision, but there was softness now in how he spoke, in how he listened. Every evening he came home before sunset, trading corporate calls for quiet dinners together. Wendy, too, had grown into her new life. She managed the design division at the foundation, mentoring young architects who could not afford school. The press that once chased them for drama now celebrated them for charity. What had started as a story built on control and image had become a partnership rooted in purpose. One Friday afternoon, Wendy walked into Mike's office, holding a small wrapped box behind her back. He was standing by the window, phone pressed to his ear. "Yes, tell the board we will increase the budget for the community project," he said. "And make sure the interns are paid fairly this time." When he hung up, she smiled. "Who are you and what have you done with Mike Hale?" He laughed. "Is that a compliment or an accusation?" "Maybe both," she teased, handing him the box. "Open it." Lay. Inside was a silver key attached to a small tag engraved with the words, "The Hale Center for Design and Hope." He looked up at her, puzzled. "It is for the new youth program," she explained. "We are opening next month. A space for students who cannot afford art school to learn design." He traced the engraving with his thumb, his voice soft. "You named it after us?" "No," she said, shaking her head gently. "I named it after what we have become." For a moment, neither spoke. Then he reached for her hand, his expression tender. "You always find ways to remind me what really matters." "Someone has to," she whispered. Later that evening, they attended a charity dinner downtown. The ballroom lights glowed amber, the same shade as the one from their first gala together, but the mood was completely different now. There was no script, no pretense. When reporters asked for a photo, Mike placed his hand at Wendy's waist, naturally, without hesitation. During dinner, the chairman raised a toast to Mike and Wendy Hale for turning a business empire into a legacy of compassion. The crowd applauded. Wendy leaned closer to Mike, smiling. "Do you realize this is the same ballroom where you told me never to touch you in public?" He grinned. "Do you realize you have not stopped proving me wrong since?" She laughed softly. "And do you realize that every time you admit I am right, it makes me love you more?" He lifted her hand and kissed it under the warm light. "Then I plan to keep admitting it forever." After the dinner, they stepped out onto the terrace overlooking the city skyline. The air was warm, carrying the scent of jasmine. Wendy rested her arms on the railing, eyes tracing the lights below. "Do you ever think about how strange it all was?" she asked. "How we started with a contract and ended up here?" Mike smiled, sliding his arm around her shoulders. "Sometimes the wrong beginnings lead to the right forever." She turned toward him, voice barely above a whisper. "Do you believe in fate now?" He looked at her, his eyes steady. "I believe in you." She felt tears sting her eyes but laughed instead. "Careful, Mr. Hale. You are sounding romantic." He chuckled. "Maybe love finally taught me something money never could." The city shimmered below, the same city that once saw them as a story built on scandal. Now, they were proof that second chances were real. Wendy leaned into him, the night quiet around them. "You once said control was everything," she said softly. "What do you say now?" He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Now I say love is." And there, under the summer stars, they kissed. No cameras, no contracts, no rules. Just the sound of two hearts that had finally learned what it meant to be free. Autumn arrived quietly that year, painting the city in shades of gold and rust. The trees outside the Hale Center swayed gently in the wind, scattering leaves across the marble steps. Inside, Wendy was walking through the new design studio, checking the final details before the center's grand opening. Students were laughing, setting up their workstations, and the scent of fresh paint still lingered in the air. She stopped at one of the windows, smiling as she watched a group of teenagers working on a project together. It was everything she had dreamed of, a place built not on privilege, but on potential. The world that once judged her was now watching her help others rise. Behind her, she heard a familiar voice. "You did this," Mike said softly. She turned, surprised to see him standing there with a cup of coffee in each hand. "We did this," she corrected, taking one from him. He looked around the studio, pride flickering in his eyes. "You turned an empty building into hope." Wendy smiled. "And you turned a man who once lived by rules into someone who actually smiles." He chuckled, guilty. For a moment they just stood there, watching the students. It felt peaceful, no contracts, no masks, just life unfolding the way it was meant to. Later that evening, the two of them attended a private dinner hosted by the Foundation's board. The table was set by the large window overlooking the city, candles flickering in the glass reflections. The conversation was warm and light, full of laughter and stories. When the meeting ended, Mike and Wendy stayed behind, sitting together in the empty dining room. "You know," Mike said, breaking the silence, "I used to believe success was measured by what you could control. Now I think it is measured by what you can let go of." Wendy smiled softly. "So what are you letting go of now?" He looked at her for a long moment. "The fear of losing you." Her heart caught in her chest. She reached across the table and took his hand. "You are not losing me, Mike. You never were." He squeezed her hand gently. "When I saw you that first day in my office, I thought you were just another name in a deal. I had no idea you would become my entire reason to change." "Oh." She blinked back tears, her voice steady. "Maybe we both needed to be broken a little to learn how to love for real." Outside, the city lights flickered like scattered stars. Mike stood and walked around the table, offering his hand. "Dance with me," he said quietly. She laughed softly. "There is no music." "There is always music," he whispered. He drew her close, and they began to sway slowly, the faint hum of the city below becoming their melody. In that moment, the memories of how they started the contract, the cold words, the loneliness faded into something distant. What remained was everything they had built from it: trust, forgiveness, and love that no one could buy or break. Wendy rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we never met?" she asked. He smiled. "I would still be rich, powerful, and completely miserable." She laughed quietly. "Good answer." He kissed her forehead, whispering, "You turned my world from numbers into meaning." Bum! And there, under the amber glow of the city lights, their dance continued slow, honest, and full of the quiet certainty that this was no longer a story about power and pride. It was a story about love that began as a lie but ended as the most truthful thing either of them had ever known. Winter returned again, gentle and quiet, wrapping the city in soft white light. It had been almost a year since the Hale Center for Design and Hope opened, and every day, Wendy woke up feeling grateful for the life she and Mike had built. Their mornings began with laughter over coffee, their nights ended with warmth instead of silence. What once started as a contract had become a home one built not by papers, but by love that had weathered every storm. That morning, Mike stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear as Wendy prepared breakfast. He was talking with one of the board members, his tone calm but steady. "Yes," he said, "approve the funding. No delays. Every student deserves a fair chance." When he hung up, Wendy turned and smiled. "Still fighting for the right things, I see." He walked over, leaning on the counter. "I guess I finally learned which battles matter." She handed him a cup of coffee. "And which ones do not?" He smiled faintly. "The ones that kept me from you." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "You are getting good at this whole emotional honesty thing." He took her hand, kissed her knuckles gently. "Only because you taught me how." That weekend, they attended the center's anniversary celebration. The hall was filled with students, families, and volunteers. Photos from the past year lined the walls, kids presenting projects, young designers receiving scholarships, and at the center of it all, a plaque that read, "Founded with kindness, built on second chances." As Wendy gave her speech, she glanced at Mike in the front row. He was not the man who once hid behind walls and contracts. He was present, proud, and unafraid to show it. When the applause faded, he stepped onto the stage beside her. "I want to add one thing," he said into the microphone. "This center is not just Wendy's dream. It is proof that love, when built with patience and forgiveness, can rebuild everything that was once broken. Even people like me." The audience fell silent for a heartbeat, then erupted in cheers. Wendy's eyes shimmered. She leaned close and whispered, "You are stealing my spotlight again." He smiled. I am fine sharing it, as long as it is with you. That evening, back at home, the snow began to fall again, blanketing the city in peace. Wendy curled up on the couch beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. The fire crackled softly in the background. "Do you ever miss the old days?" she asked quietly. He laughed. "You mean the days when I thought love was a weakness and emotions were liabilities?" "Not even a little." She smiled, tracing circles on his hand. "I guess we finally made it through every test." "Loco." He looked down at her, his expression tender. "No, we just stopped pretending it was a test. This is life, and it is better because you are in it." She leaned up and kissed him, slow and real. Outside, the snowflakes drifted past the window, catching the light like tiny stars. Mike whispered against her hair. "I once said never touch me in public. Now I do not want to stop touching you at all." Wendy laughed quietly, her voice full of warmth. "Then do not stop." RK. They stayed like that, holding each other as the night deepened, surrounded by the quiet proof of how far they had come. From a lie to a love story, from a contract to a commitment. And as the snow fell softly outside, it felt like the universe itself was finally at peace with the truth they had written together. Spring sunlight spilled through the wide windows of the Hale penthouse, painting everything in soft gold. The city below was waking up, alive with noise and color. Wendy stood on the balcony, a warm breeze lifting her hair as she watered the small garden she had built there. A collection of wildflowers, herbs, and a single rose bush that bloomed brighter every season. Inside, Mike was reading the morning paper, glasses perched on his nose, a cup of black coffee cooling beside him. When she stepped in, he looked up and smiled, the kind of smile that still caught her off guard no matter how much time had passed. "Good morning, Mrs. Hale," he said gently. She grinned. "You know you do not have to call me that every morning." "I know," he said, folding the paper, "but I like the reminder." She laughed softly and sat across from him, pouring herself some tea. "Do you ever think about how far we have come? About how different we are now?" He nodded slowly. "Every day. And every day I still wonder how someone like me got lucky enough to find you." Wendy reached across the table, taking his hand. "You did not find me, Mike. You just finally looked up from all your walls." He squeezed her hand, eyes warm. "And I never plan on looking away again." Later that day, they attended a student showcase at the Hale Center. The air buzzed with laughter, music, and the sound of dreams coming alive. Young artists proudly displayed their work, and cameras flashed as the couple moved through the crowd. But unlike before, there was no stiffness, no act, just two people genuinely proud of what they had built together. A young girl approached Wendy shyly, clutching a sketchbook. "Mrs. Hale, can I show you something?" Wendy knelt to look. The drawing was a scene of a woman giving a man her coat, under a sign that read, "Kindness is stronger than power." "It is beautiful," Wendy said softly. "What inspired this?" The girl smiled. "I read your story online. I like that you helped him change instead of giving up on him." Wendy's throat tightened. "Sometimes love is not about changing someone," she said. "It is about believing they can be better." From a few steps away, Mike watched the moment, pride flickering in his eyes. When the girl ran off, he joined Wendy and slipped an arm around her. "You see," he whispered, "you did not just change me. You changed everyone who heard about us." She leaned into him. "We both changed, Mike. That is the point." That night, they returned home to the quiet rhythm of the city. Wendy placed her sketchbook on the coffee table and curled up beside him on the couch. The lights were low, the sound of traffic fading beneath the hum of the fireplace. Mike turned to her. "Do you know what tomorrow is?" She thought for a second. "Our anniversary?" He smiled. "The day we signed that ridiculous contract." She laughed, resting her head on his shoulder. "Back then you said, 'Never touch me in public.' Arding dopt." He chuckled softly. "And now?" "Now," she said, lifting her face to his, "you do not need to say a word." He kissed her, slow and unhurried, the city lights flickering behind them like scattered stars. When they finally broke apart, she whispered, "We started as a lie, Mike." He smiled. "Maybe. But somewhere along the way, it became the truest thing in my life." Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain and new beginnings. The rosebush on the balcony swayed gently under the moonlight. Their story had begun with a contract written in cold ink and ended with a promise written in love. And as Wendy leaned against him, the world beyond their windows blurred into quiet peace, proof that even the most guarded hearts could find their way home.